What do you know about the conditions surrounding your birth?
Well, I know that my parents didn't want to have kids, and they got married when they were in college, and they both got established in their jobs and had started their own life. And then when they were around 32 or 33, they decided that they didn't want to not leave any generations in the future of their family, to have the family end with them. And so they started thinking about having kids. And then for the next year, I think, they tried to have kids, but my mom couldn't get pregnant. And so after a year, they gave up and decided that they just were going to go back to not having kids, and they were okay with that. And then 3 months later, my mom got pregnant, and then I was born. And my parents were living in a small house, like in a suburb that they had bought because they moved together for my dad's job. And so I know that they had to think about like where the schools were around there, and where the parks were and stuff that they hadn't thought about like when they bought the house, because they originally weren't going to have kids. And then I think they decided to have my brother a few years later because they both had siblings and didn't want me to grow up without any other sibling, because that's a important part in a child's life. And I think that's it.
Do you know about anything when you came out?
I think, I wonder who was visiting. I bet my grandma was there or my aunt. I feel like my dad didn't videotape it, but maybe he did. I think it's weird when people videotape births, but maybe that's just my opinion.
Okay. Well, have you ever come close to death?
Personally, no. I don't think I've had any experience that has put me close to death, which I feel very fortunate about. But I have had a close friend that contemplated committing suicide, and but before she did, she checked herself into a hospital, and so she didn't tell anyone but her family and me and another one of our close friends. And so this was pretty much the closest experience I've had like with death, even though there was no attempted suicide. The clinic that she was checked into for a couple days at the hospital was where people are checked into when they attempt to commit suicide. And so going to visit her and going to talk to her, and this whole experience was really like eye-opening to me, because I haven't had any experiences like it personally. And so I kind of lived vicariously through her, and like through looking and watching all the people in the clinic. And it's interesting. It makes you think about like your life and the value of life. And I wrestled with the thought, some of these people are either like have mental illnesses or have different diseases, and like where do you draw the line between like a life and someone just like existing? Because if you have something that's like so overwhelming and basically prevents you from living your own life because you're so consumed by this disease or this illness, like where does that like make lost that train of thought. What does that leave you with? Like what is that like a real life, and what value does that have? And I don't have an answer to any of these questions, but it definitely made me think about them in a way that I never thought of before. And luckily my friend's okay, and she's out, and hopefully I don't have to deal with her going back to anywhere like that. But it definitely made me think about what if she had succeeded, what if she had tried. And yeah.
Okay. Well, have you ever been accused of something you did not do?
Not in a major way. I was in high school, and I got, obviously, as most high schoolers do, I fought with my parents. And I remember this one particular fight with my dad, because we got in arguments a lot about like my behavior and attitude towards them, because I always let all my negative feelings and my frustrations like out on my parents. And I remember one time he interpreted what I said to be very hostile and aggressive towards him, even though I genuinely did not mean it to be that way. And I think he was so on edge because, like, maybe he had a bad day at work, or like he had a fight with my mom, and then for me to come in and say something, even though I didn't mean it to be this way, he interpreted this way and basically, like, blew up and got so mad at me and, like, screamed at me, you know, embarrassed me in front of, you know, my mom and my brother, and, like, was just, like, calling me all these names and, like, you know, doing all, like, saying all these things and how bad of a person I was. And I was so angry, and I, like, am not a person that gets angry very often. I mostly just get, like, upset, and I was just so, I remember being livid. I was, like, crying and, you know, like, shaking because, not because I was upset that I got yelled at, but because I was mad because I felt like it was, like, an injustice. That, you know, sometimes you know when you've done something wrong, but in this case, I was so positive that I hadn't done anything wrong, and that feeling that you, like, can't change his mind. Like, I couldn't, every time I tried to tell him that, it, you know, I didn't mean it that way, or that wasn't what I meant, like, he just didn't believe it and got more angry at me for trying to, like, justify it or excuse it. And so I just freaked out, and I, like, definitely thought about, like, leaving or going to my friend's house or just, like, taking a walk, because I, for the first time, I almost want to say in my whole life, felt like I just couldn't control, like, my own anger and emotion. And I think that it's interesting, if I want to make a broader connection, to all the people that, like, all the stories we hear about people that are innocent, you know, being accused of something, whether it's, like, a court system or it's even, like, going back to the witch trials, you know, like, they're being accused of, you know, this thing that you can't prove. And so how frustrating it would it be to, like, basically being, you know, sentenced to death over something that you didn't do but can't really prove that you didn't do. And so I think that's really interesting.
That is interesting.
Anything else?
No, I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Of course.